Thank you very much for attending this. This is going to be a really interesting panel. It is about the Music Fund, and these gentlemen are data scientists who are working on applying their techniques to helping artists and helping musicians and making unique kinds of deals in the future. So I'll just introduce them. Jeff, who is here to my right, Jeffrey Cross, he leads a team of San Francisco-based data scientists, and they take a speculative and entrepreneurial approach to the creation of new ventures and data resources. He was, before he moved to the US 2 years ago, he was based in Oxford, was a founder of HiveMind, which is a subsidiary of Winton, which is the company that owns the Music Fund. And he, before that, worked as a specialist in image processing and machine vision. He has also worked at the Formula One team McLaren, which is, if I'm not mistaken, a British auto racing outfit.
It's a bit like NASCAR.
Yeah, we had a conversation last night where I brought up the great book Moneyball, and Jeff admitted that he didn't know anything about baseball, but anything you want to know about British auto racing analytics, he's your man.
Or cricket.
Right, yes, he made a cricket joke as well, so that we can look forward to that. He has a PhD from Oxford University and an MEng. Am I saying that right? Sorry.
A Master of Engineering.
Master of Engineering, I knew that, from Cambridge. He holds a number of patents. His work has been reported in New Scientist, Popular Science, Newsweek, and by the BBC. So welcome to Jeff.
Thank you.
Over on the far right is Thomas Jerd. Did I pronounce that right?
Jurdy.
I am so bad at bio. Sorry, we'll get the bio thing over with quickly. Before joining Winton Group's San Francisco Data Science Office to launch the Music Fund, Thomas was senior data scientist at NAC-IT, using machine learning to discover predictive patterns in mobile gameplay data for cognitive and personality assessment and opportunity matching. He has a background in cognitive neuroscience, so he messes with people's brains, is what I understand. He has conducted research at Brown University. He had a double major in music. He has been talking to me a lot about his classical experience, which is super interesting. University of Minnesota, Harvard, Stanford, analyzed neurocontrol of movement, collective cognition, phonological memory, and neuroeconomics. I am totally mangling the pronunciations here, I apologize. His work has been published in Journal of Neuroscience, Social Neuroscience, and the Oxford University Press. Welcome to Thomas. And briefly about me, my name is Steve Knopper. I am a contributing editor to Rolling Stone magazine. I have been covering the music business since 2002-ish. I've written a couple of books. I wrote one about Michael Jackson. I also wrote one called Appetite for Self-Destruction, the Spectacular Crash of the Record Industry in the Digital Age. That came out in 2009, and it's all about sort of how the record business mangled its response to MP3s and piracy and so forth. And I just updated it last year, so if you're interested, it's on Amazon. So gentlemen, welcome to the panel. Thank you so much. Thanks for enduring my mangling of pronunciations. I guess I'd like to start by asking you a little bit to explain the model. I mean, what is the Music Fund? How is it funded? Where do you get the capital from? And what do you intend to do to work with artists?
So I think I'll probably start with a bit of history. Winton, our parent company, was founded about 20 years ago. It's an investment management company. But it was founded by a guy called David Harding. He's actually a scientist, same as both of us. And his thoughts 20 years ago were, I can use science to predict the stock market. I can use science to invest in the markets and make money. And to the kind of younger audience in the room, they probably think that's completely obvious. And the older people might remember that back then it would probably have been considered a completely insane idea. And David Harding had a lot of people telling me he was crazy. He went off and did it. 20 years later, he's running a company of managing about $30 billion. And the idea behind Winton is it's 100% automated. It's data in. We use the data to essentially predict the future. And once we can predict the future, we can invest in the markets, and hopefully we do better than zero. just before anybody sort of gets excited about the world of high-frequency trading, we do long-term predictions. So we're predicting 3 9-month horizons. We're not predicting sort of 5-minute horizons. So we're not the people that you see in films. So that's the background. About 6 months ago, we were starting to look at different areas that we could use some of our expertise. Our expertise being prediction from data. And then kind of through a random set of conversations, we started hearing about the world of music royalties. And I think there's quite a lot, I think, if there's any musicians here, or in fact anybody who's been reading the musical press, there's been quite a lot of talk about music royalties as an asset class. And we thought this is an interesting area. There's increasing amount of data, and I'll get Thomas to tell us a bit about the data in a second. And this slide probably tells you, gives you sort of a hint of some of that. But there's an increasing amount of data in the music world, and that's the world that we like. So predicting the outcome of music, we consider it kind of similar to predicting the stock market. And so we're looking at putting together this fund, the music fund, and the idea there is we will invest in musicians past, so we will buy a portion of their royalty stream and allow them to capitalize on that royalty stream. So if we're buying a small portion of somebody's royalty stream, we'll be giving them money, essentially money up front, and they would then be encouraged to obviously use that to develop their career. So we're kind of like a VC for musicians. If you're an entrepreneur, it's very easy to raise money. If you're a musician, you know it's pretty hard to raise money. But the difference is we're completely driven by data. And the nice thing about that is that it means that we're completely unbiased. So we're not going to be investing based on what you look like or even really whether we like your music. It's going to be based on what the data tells us. If the data is if it looks like you've got a nice stable royalty stream, then obviously that's great, and that would be valued higher than something which is a kind of 5-minute wonder. So maybe now's a good point to actually talk a little bit about the data, and maybe Thomas can tell us a bit about that.
Sure. So you can see here, this fun slide is just showing basically on all these various metrics that are sort of interesting. Just since we started talking at 11 a.m., how many new data points are out there. So we have new songs that have been added to Spotify, new playlists, new subscribers to streaming services, hours of music that have been added to SoundCloud, and then we also have social media, of course, where these superstars like Katy Perry and Beyonce acquire followers on a massive scale every day. And all that is generating a lot of data that we can look at to understand patterns of consumption of music. And we also look at some other data sources. I can show things like this. So when we're trying to make a forecast of what's going to happen to a track of music in the future, of course we can look at the past royalties and use that to predict some sort of trend. There's also data that sort of mirrors the actual royalty numbers, but has some different lenses on it. People use these different platforms for different purposes, and the different streaming platforms have sort of different audiences they cater to, and search can indicate different sorts of levels of interest, and then we have discovery moments where people are using some app to say, what is this that's playing right now? I need to know what it is. These are all data points that point to music actually being consumed, but it's sort of different lenses on it that we can take a look at to add nuance to our forecast models. And then we also have these sort of, what I put in the alternative data column, all sorts of data that's out there about which we can make fun hypotheses to test out and see if they hold up as statistically significant predictors of future royalties. So that can be things like how a track, the consumption of a track reacts to different events out in the world, where people are listening and who is listening, characterizing who the different audiences are, looking at tour schedules, all sorts of stuff. So there are innumerable hypotheses out there that could help us make smarter and smarter bets on musicians.
Good. So just to sum up, my understanding of this is that Winton is making, or the music fund is making bets on, or will make bets on artists and their careers and potentially their income and their revenue streams, the way that Winton has been making bets on finance over the years, right? Is that a fair way to put it?
Yes, exactly. And probably different from, you could argue that a record label does the same, but a record label makes a small number of very big bets, and we're looking at making a very, very large number of small bets.
Got it. Got it. Okay. And so this, I keep using the baseball analogy, forgive me, but it reminds me of the record industry is a place where, guys with solid gold ears would be the ones to pick who the artists were who were going to be successful, and they would use sort of their instinct. At a certain point, just like the old-fashioned scouts in baseball did, at a certain point, data and advanced metrics came in, and there's all this data available now, and you can make smarter and smarter bets based on artists' past royalty streams, what might happen with them in the future, right? Is that
Yeah.
also fair?
Yeah.
Okay. So tell me a little bit about how the bets will, or I should say the investments will happen, how you'll identify the artists or whether they'll identify you, and also where the money's coming from.
I think I think the idea is we as I said, we're going to be placing a lot of bets, so we're expecting that musicians will hopefully come to us, and they will see us as a source of fair and unbiased funding for their future careers. So I think in answer to your first question, the musicians will come to us. We might end up partnering with some platforms or other entities already in the music world. So that's kind of the answer to the first question. The money obviously comes from a pool, and that money we're fairly confident we have the resources to sort of create that pool.
Yeah. Tell me, Thomas, we were talking about this a little bit last night, but tell me what data exactly that you plan to use, and sort of why do you have, how are you using this data in different ways than anybody? It's all public data is my understanding. How are you using it differently and more interestingly?
Yeah, so we recognize that we're sort of new to the music industry, but we do have a lot of experience with data. And there are a lot of pitfalls with machine learning and data, a lot of ways that data can lead you astray if you're not careful about checking your hypotheses and that sort of thing. So everyone understands that there's this whole universe of data out there. We're hoping to bring our particular expertise to using that to make the most reliable predictions possible. So I have another slide here. So we're capitalizing on this basic trend toward data that there's just a lot more of it. There's more data about individuals and their personalized preferences. It's gotten a lot more precise and a lot more nuanced in terms of where, when, who, why. Like all these sort of data points are out there in a quantity that was not even hinted at 10 years ago, and that is all. Those are all sources of information we can use to apply machine learning algorithms to make a prediction that we can have some confidence in, and yeah.
Sorry, I was just going to add to that. I think it's interesting because I think one of the things that we're clearly lacking is knowledge of the music industry, and I think we're very conscious of that. But in some ways, that's an advantage because we're not biased by everything, the knowledge that you can get. And we sort of have the same problem in finance world. We tend to actually hire people like myself who have had no previous experience in finance because we hope that the lack of bias is a good thing rather than a bad thing.
Yeah, that's good. Thomas, can you show the slide that you showed me last night about the international data? And
sure,
it takes a second to kind of figure out, but it's a really fascinating slide.
Yeah, so one of the things we're interested in is, oh, that's not the right one. Yeah. So we can get data now about where people are listening, and we're really interested in what we can learn from that. So this is a correlation matrix, which, if you're not familiar, is imagine that, so we have countries listed in each row is a country, and then those same countries are listed again at the top column. So we're comparing country versus country in pairs, and the correlation matrix is showing for each row and column cell how similar are those countries? How much are they alike in terms of what music they like at the same time? So if we read the Singapore row, we can see that Singapore is more similar to Hong Kong than to Thailand, for example. And so if we look at, visualize the data in this way, an immediate striking finding is that big yellow square in the center. Those are all the Latin American countries minus Brazil. So it's identifying that those countries are all very similar to each other, much more so than they are to any of the other countries on the list. So that is basically a Latin music cluster. And we can use a cluster analysis to let the data show us where these natural clusters are falling. And they fall on sort of intuitive lines of linguistic and geographic boundaries. So the reason Brazil isn't part of that cluster is because they speak Portuguese, and Brazil is in the blue cluster with Europe and they're not in the Latin cluster. They're in with the European cluster. So we can then identify these sorts of different markets and extrapolate patterns for if your song is trending in this cluster, what are the odds that it will reach into these other clusters? We can actually look at some specific examples of that. So here we're going to look at a particular track called Feel It Still and watch how it spreads across the world. It became so it's synced up to the 0 line here is when it became a global hit. And we can see what is happening before and then how it spread. So in this particular example, Feel It Still, which is paused for some reason. Okay. So here's another example, just overlaying on top. So Feel It Still started off popular in Austria and the United States, and then it sort of had these, you can see these sort of blue pulses in Switzerland and Czech Republic where it sort of gets popular and then fades again. And then when it hit Italy and Canada, that sort of were footholds to then penetrate the rest of the cluster, and then it became popular more widely. And then this green example, New Rules, that started out popular in Taiwan, and then it hit Canada sort of right away, and then again had this sort of incubation period where it sort of rises and falls within this subset of countries, and then when it managed to reach Portugal, then it sort of got into Europe, and from there it spread throughout the rest of Asia and even into the Latin cluster. It became popular everywhere. And we have then one more example, Ahora Dice. That was a huge hit in the Latin cluster and never really left. But that cluster is so demographically powerful. It's sort of a good example of something that it became a global hit just based on the numbers within those Latin countries, and never really needed to cross out. So what we're doing with this sort of analysis is looking for if we can identify categories of pathways to success or gateway regions, and that's the sort of data insights where not only can we use that to make predictions about what's a good bet for what has potential to reach into further markets, but we can also share those sorts of insights with the musicians in our portfolio. Can I say, based on where your music has been so far, you might consider touring Europe and playing some gigs in Portugal. That's the sort of insight we'd love to be able to share with people.
So yeah, so the way you're analyzing the data, just to take one kind of hypothetical example based on what you showed just now and what you showed me last night, if you're a Brazilian artist and you play kind of traditional Brazilian music, it might make more sense for you to tour in parts of Europe than in parts of your neighboring Latin American countries, right?
Yeah, and then of course, as we get more and more data, we'd love to be able to break that down even further and say maybe that applies to certain genres, and so we can really make focused predictions based on the data.
Yeah, and you can even go further and start to think, maybe at certain times of the year it's better to, if you're looking to launch an album at certain times of the year, it's better than other times of the year.
Right. Advanced metrics, yeah. So let me back up and let's make sure that we're clear on what the model is, because there's two sides to this that I want to address. And one is the data, which we've been discussing. And I mean, it's all public data. This is all data that you can get on Shazam and Spotify and all these YouTube and all these other places. But then the other side of this is the fact that you're going to be investing in artists and in their royalty streams. Just taking it more on that point and away from the data for 1 second, can you talk about how that will work? I mean, once an artist says, we want to sign up with you, this is great, you wind up essentially becoming a partner with the artist, right?
Yeah, so, well, it's probably less of a partner than a record label.
Right.
So we're not, we're investing in the artist, but we're investing in the artist, we're providing them with capital, and that's it. I think there's actually quite an interesting evolution that we believe is happening within the music industry, and that's that musicians are becoming independent more, and they're very happy being independent, and I think that we encourage that. So we would like to see a musician as a startup business, and we are just providing the capital to musicians for them to build up their business. And so I think that's very different from a record label, because a record label will provide you with a whole load of added services, and they will provide you PR, and that's probably useful if you're Taylor Swift. But if you're a starting up in the music world, that I would guess that most musicians don't need those services. I would guess that they're very happy on Twitter themselves, and they're very happy actually marketing themselves, because they're running a business which is them.
Yeah, and we have a slide here just showing some of the tools that are increasingly available out there for the artist who's more going on their own. We consider this sort of the post-revolution approach, where the artist just has a lot more choices because there are various solutions out there. So if you want to do your own writing and recording in your garage, or if you want to go through TuneCore to release to the platforms, if you want to promote yourself on Twitter, or you can hire experts in those particular services as you choose, rather than having everything decided by a label. And then the music fund can just be part of that suite of tools that independent artists can use to fund their career and keep going.
Jeff, talk a little bit about what we discussed last night about the idea of the percents and the widget that you're ultimately going to have on the website that everyone's fascinated with. Which, if I'm an artist and I come to you and I want to use this data, I can invest. I could have you invest 1%. I could have you invest 99%. Can you talk a little bit about that?
I mean, I think we will essentially, behind the scenes, we will have a formula, and that formula will tell us that if you want to sell us 1% of your royalty stream, we would give you X amount of dollars. On the other hand, if you wanted to sell 100%, we would give you some other amount, and it would probably be a bit larger, but maybe not. Behind the scenes there would be this formula. The nice thing about that is that it makes it completely flexible. So we want to leave that decision up to the musician, and in the ideal world, the musician will go onto our website and they will have a couple of sliders, and the sliders will be how much do you want to sell and for how long. And they can then choose what the relationship is with us, so that we're not owning them for forever. It could be that they're just looking to raise a certain amount of money to launch a new album, and they know how much money they need, and so they can decide using these sliders. They can decide exactly how much they want to sell and for how long. And we'd like to encourage, I think we would like to encourage people not to sell their entire royalty stream, because we'd like them to have, again, a finance term, but have some skin in the game. Yeah.
Yeah, and just to stick on that point one more second, and then we'll get Thomas back to talk about the data analysis. But I mean, we were talking about the scenario last night. You know, I'm Ozzy Osbourne, and I'm an established artist, and everything's going really well. I've got plenty of royalty streams. I've got good management. Sharon does a good job, et cetera. But let's say I want to play around with this, and I want to do some day trading, so to speak. I could ask you to invest 1% into my royalty streams. And then you would, in that scenario, work with Sharon and the management team and be sort of an advisor.
Well, I think once they, I think the important thing to say is we because of the volume, our plan, and also because we're not pitching ourselves as a record label, we're not going to be having a personal relationship with our musicians. They're running a business. Frankly, I don't know much about running a music business. I'm sure that every musician knows a lot more about it than I do. we're very happy to share our data insights, as Thomas was saying, and I think that's probably the bit that they would get some value from. But I think that we're not going to be sitting at the end of the phone and phoning them up and saying you should have done a gig in Atlanta rather than Georgia, rather than New York. That's not really the kind of level of interaction that we're looking to have.
But if they wanted you to get that involved and give really intense, deep data analysis, you could provide that for them in under that scenario.
I think I can certainly see a world in the future where they again, it would probably be data. Well, it would be entirely data driven. It would probably be through some interface. I don't imagine myself sitting answering the phone call from 3,000 musicians, but I can totally see a world in which there's a data interface that allows the musician to make queries onto our data and use that to sort of direct their business.
Got it. Thomas, we were talking about the idea last night, and you kind of showed some examples of this. So let me know if you have other deeper looks at this, but of sort of running through an example of an artist whose data you might have, whose royalty data and other data you might have, and how this can be used to help them.
Sure. I guess a good example is we know Winton's whole background is about making forecasts from trends. So we like to look at trends and basically figure out whether it's going to go stay flat, go up or down. And we know that those trends, there's some intrinsic properties in the music that cause fluctuations in those trends, and they're also affected by external events. So for example, if we look at, is this going to be the right one? Yeah. So here's an example where we have this guy. He's a country singer named Jackie Lee, and there's this typical pattern that you see where a song is released and there's a spike in interest and then it decays. An interesting thing here is that then we later see there's a resurgence in interest. People are starting to listen more again, which is somewhat unusual. I mean, it happens a lot, but it's often driven by some external event. So we might ask, why did this happen with this particular track? And by scanning across various data sources, and in this case, it's a very easy answer because he came out with another single. So this song Headphones came out, and the new single affected the back catalog, this older song. So that's the type of event that we would try to, for an artist coming to us to finance a new album, we would maybe look to their back catalog and see what happened with their previous releases. Did their previous releases sort of reactivate the interest in their old music? And we can extend this out with Jackie Lee and see that he had one single, Leave the Light On, that didn't have much of an impact on these older songs, and then he had another bigger hit, Getting Over You, which did. So if we were invested in this original song, knowing that these extra singles are going to be released would be a positive sort of indicator for us.
That's really interesting. Can you show, we talked about this last night, but can you show the slide about the artists who have passed away?
Oh, yes.
Because that's really interesting, and we don't mean to be crass about this, but it is a reality in the music business.
Yeah, it's kind of a sad slide, so prepare yourselves. Because as everyone knows, we've lost a lot of artists that are very important over the past few years. And you can look at it as sort of a positive that gets them back in the news and the public consciousness, and we see this massive spike in interest in all these artists when it's announced that they've passed away. From a data perspective, this is important to know about because we're using historic data to train our models, and if our models don't understand this, then they'll see these massive spikes and attribute it to an improper cause. So we have to be able to in our model training, figure out these news events are triggering these massive shifts in traffic, and then sort of positive ending to this slide is if we look at the orange space oddity line at the very end, there's another little blip you can see after 2018. And that's actually from when Elon Musk launched his Starman into orbit and the Tesla's radio is playing Space Oddity. So it was in the news, and we can see relative to this sort of baseline of when people are listening to that song, just it being in the news and in the public consciousness caused this measurable, significant uptick in listening.
So some of what you're doing is obvious and it's based on public data. Like David Bowie dies and Space Oddity starts to sell a lot more copies and stream many more times. But what you guys can do is really analyze this to a much finer degree and show us that little circle on the right side and say there's a blip there, and you might not have seen that before, even if you're the artist.
Yeah, and definitely algorithmic scanning of news sources is an area of active development, and with natural language processing and all these new technologies, it's more possible to do this at scale and make inferences about what is driving these different trends in the activity.
And I think actually this has got a very it mirrors exactly what we do in the financial markets. I think often these events are events that are not predictable, and they're not actually that useful to us because we can't predict. Can't predict when somebody's going to die, and we don't want to. But we use it more as a way of removing them from our historic data, as Thomas said. I think it's more just that those are events that happen, and they're in the data. But if you're looking at a big bunch of data, you essentially want to remove those events.
Let's back up and talk about Winton a little bit. Winton is a financial analysis company. Why make a bet on music? Why start this division in the first place? And if you can answer this, how much money are we talking about? I mean, if an artist signs up with you, can you give a range? I don't know how specific you can get. And it's all hypothetical so far, I know.
Unfortunately, I can't answer that last question. There's various regulatory reasons. But why we're interested, I think we're interested for a number of reasons, really. One was it was interesting just purely from a kind of geek point of view. There's lots of data, and people like myself and Thomas like data. And it's also data that is kind of, we can understand it, and it's sort of fun to play with. And as those last slides showed, I think it tells you something about the world. So that's one reason. The kind of more business reason is there's a very strong argument to say that the music industry is not correlated with anything else that we currently look at. There's no particular reason why the music industry would be correlated with the stock market. It might be, I don't know, but there's no particular obvious reason. So that makes it very interesting from our point of view. And the third reason was kind of more the altruistic reason, and that's that we felt like we have two advantages as a finance business in a data-driven finance business. One is that we're very good at raising capital. That's what we do for business, and we're very good at that. And the other one is that we know a lot about data, and we're very comfortable with data. We're very happy with predicting the future. We do this on a daily basis, and we do it there's quite high stakes involved in the business we operate, and that we've been going for 20 years, so we're fairly confident with that. So we sort of thought those are two things that are things that we've got to our advantage. And so the third bit was how can we really help an industry such as the music industry, and this seemed like a very good way of doing it.
And just to add to the sort of non-altruistic side, we also know that it's sort of a good time to get involved in music, because everyone knows that we had this kind of collapse from the height of CD sales, that revenue was going down and down and down. And then we do see that digital was starting to grow, and updating this chart, we can see that digital is sort of starting to rescue, and the industry has really turned a corner. So a lot of smart analysts are projecting continued growth in music revenue. So there's just more business out there to get. So it's kind of a good time to get involved.
This chart is super interesting to me, and kind of just solidifies things that we already suspected from within the music business, but I'm really interested in the performance, the little blue blip right there. I mean, we all kind of knew that's been happening, but it's interesting to see that starkly like that. Tell us about yourselves and sort of both of your personal interests in music, and what led you to this spot, and why you're passionate about it.
I think I know where this is going. Go on, Thomas.
We've been over this.
So, yeah, I did a double major with music in college, and I sort of knew that I didn't have it in me to be a performer and make a living that way. So I majored in neuroscience, thinking that's going to be more of my career. But music has always been a big passion of mine. And the data revolution in music is really interesting to me because, I think there's so much potential out there now that we're getting the data so personalized and algorithmically curated, and so my music tastes have been extremely eclectic. Like I listen to a lot of Bach and Stravinsky and Schoenberg and early Tori Amos and Tool, and I think it's great that
You're now on the record.
Yeah. And so now there are services where I can go and say, this is what I like, or they can just tell this is what you're listening to, and we can recommend in a way that never would have been possible when I was, a teenager and going to CD stores, and you couldn't even listen necessarily to a CD before you bought it. You had to save up, and for this one track, I'm going to risk it on this whole CD. And now there's so much power out there through data to deliver you the content that you haven't even discovered yet, but is a good prediction for your personal musical taste. I find that really exciting.
I think from my point of view, I'm sort of an amateur music listener at best, but I enjoy music, I love music, but I'm also married to a musician, and it was kind of, we joke because about a year ago, she started saying to me that she didn't actually understand how the royalties industry worked and how complicated it was. And so I ended up on this project, and it kind of feels like I've probably gone a bit too far to answer her questions. But I think I'm interested in the music industry. I've always been interested in the music industry. I lived in Oxford for about 20 years. Oxford this is Oxford, UK. Oxford has got a very strong music history, and I like the idea that I can do something which I know about, which is data and science, and help an industry that I love.
Yeah. Let's talk a little bit more broadly about the evolution in the music business of, and I've been writing about the music business for a while, and it used to be, to determine chart placement, a label would call a record store somewhere in the 70s and say, how many copies of Bruce Springsteen did you sell? And the record store would say, I'm paraphrasing, how many did you want us to sell? And until SoundScan came along, that was kind of in large part how the music business worked. But now there's all this very fine data that everyone has access to. Can you talk a little bit about that evolution and the implications of why that's important and how it's useful for artists and to empower artists?
Yeah, I think the data revolution in general is a huge democratizing influence because, as we already covered, there are so many great tools out there now for you to help you create your own music, and then also for that music to be monitored. And I'm sure all digitally savvy musicians are familiar with the various analytics tools and social media trend analysis tools, so that you can track and your team can track what's going on. And we don't depend on these sort of traditional gatekeepers who used to have as you say, they could kind of control what numbers got out there about what people are listening to, and they could push their own agendas. And now we can just have more access globally to the truth of what people are actually listening to, and it's pretty exciting.
I think the other bit to this slide, which is probably implicit rather than explicit, is that the massive growth in digital has resulted in people listening to a much wider variety of music. I personally do it. Once you've signed up to Apple Music or Spotify, you've got access to everything, and previously you would have had to go to the record store and you would have bought an album, and there's quite a big barrier to entry there. Whereas now I can just pick up my iPhone and listen to pretty much any music. And I do that often when somebody mentions a musician in conversation. I'll go and sort of listen to it. And I think that's great for the music industry because it's sort of moved some of the emphasis from the guys at the top downwards. And now there's a much longer tail of musicians who are able to actually live off their music royalties.
Let's talk a little bit, and then we'll throw it open to questions in a few minutes, but let's talk a little bit about, you haven't signed any artists yet for this, or you haven't started working with artists yet. Just quickly, can you address how that's going to work and when you start and so forth?
So this was sort of our soft launch. We've been working in the background on this for about 6 months, and the aim of coming here was to really see just how the music industry responded to us, because we're very aware of the fact that we're coming in from the outside. We're very aware that we're a bunch of geeks coming to hopefully try and solve a problem that we believe is there, but it might be actually that the musicians would say to us, "Oh, we've got tons of money, we don't need you." And so this is kind of our soft launch. Our aim, our challenge is getting access to the music community. We want this to be available to hundreds, thousands of musicians, and that's a challenge for us because we don't know how to get access to that immediately. And as a result, the plan is to very likely to partner with some PROs or some platforms. We're expecting to do that over the next few months, and we're probably looking at making our first investments this year.
And what do you do if an artist wants to work with you and make an arrangement with you, but it's a complicated artist? It's, I recently interviewed David Crosby about his Spotify royalties, his streaming royalties, and he was pretty upset about that. But part of the reason he's upset is because he's had like 8 million labels and 8 million publishers and various management companies, and so many people have taken a piece out of his pie, his various pies over the years. What do you do when you have an artist who's that complicated and comes to you, and the royalty stream is not quite as straightforward as it seems?
Well, I think again we're probably going to end up partnering with some players in the market who know that world, and it is a complicated, messy, tangled world, and I would love that to change. I'd love this to just be the starting point for all of those tangles to be untangled, and I know we don't want to necessarily talk about blockchain because we'll get distracted, but that.
Please do. I just may not be able to follow up very well.
We've deliberately not talked about blockchain because it sort of ends up grabbing the highlight, the limelight, and that's not really the main purpose in this. But that kind of technology, we're hoping that will help solve some of the problems. The royalty market, from my point of view, coming in from the outside, is insane and incredibly complicated. And I would love to actually do a survey and ask the audience whether anybody actually understands it. But one person's put their hand up. It's not as simple as it could be. And so we're hoping that this is kind of the start of something that will simplify itself and become. I suppose the other thing is it will then become a market that is more efficient and less controlled by the record labels.
And I think also there are, along with that, the suite of digital tools I showed earlier, there are tools coming online now that help artists with that sort of thing, with the audio fingerprinting technology, tools that can go out and scan, find out where your music is that you might not know about. So I think solutions are coming up. So it's a huge problem, but hopefully we're starting to address it.
We were talking a little bit last night, and I know this doesn't work exactly like this, but and I'm sorry to go back to baseball again, but in the end, after the whole Moneyball thing, baseball has evolved to the point where a successful team uses both things. It uses the instincts of the people who have been working with the players and the teams, and baseball players since high school, and the term we used was crusty old managers, but that's probably not totally fair. But then also there's another side of it where there's this new generation of data analysts who are coming in and analyzing all the advanced statistics. And correct me if I'm wrong, but the way you guys have been explaining this, that's sort of how I see this. You'd be working sort of hand in hand with the people who have the instincts from working in the music business for many years.
Yeah, the analogy is very similar in finance, but I think data doesn't tell you something that is really obvious. Well, it does tell you something that's really obvious, but you probably knew it already. So you don't need data to tell you that launching an album in Lithuanian is probably not going to be successful in Portland, Oregon. The data would tell you that, but it's not very useful. And so that's hopefully what your manager, if he's a decent manager, will probably tell you that. So I'm not saying that the data is going to tell you things that your manager doesn't know, but it might tell you some subtle things that your manager doesn't know. And I think that's really where the data is valuable. It might tell you, again, a kind of crazy example. It might tell you that launching an album on a Friday Friday is better than a Wednesday. And that would be aggregated across thousands of tracks and huge amounts of data. And as I say, that's completely made up on the spot, and it might not be true, but that's probably something that if it was a very subtle effect, that's probably something that the manager wouldn't know. And so there's definitely a place for the manager, and there's definitely a place for the data, and I think that hopefully they will work together.
I asked you guys a flip question last night. I live in Colorado, and I'm about to rehearse for the first time with a punk rock cover band in my hometown of Denver. And I said, will the data tell us that we should play, Anarchy in the UK in Denver and London Calling in Colorado Springs? Do you get that fine point? And I was kind of being flip, but you sort of said, yes, the data can tell you that, right?
I think if we had enough data, it would be able to tell you that, yes.
Yeah, that's sort of in the long-term future.
Got it. Okay. That was my I'm in a band question. Sorry.
And a bit of PR.
Yeah, right. That's right. Yeah. So I guess I'll ask you to follow up and just, are there any concluding things that either of you want to say before we throw it up into questions?
Well, I do want to mention you guys should all check out Steve's book. Steve wrote a great book, Appetite for Self-Destruction, and it recently updated since Spotify and the streaming platforms have sort of changed everything. It's a really great eye-opening look at it covers some of this data revolution stuff that we're talking about. So check that out.
Thank you for saying that. Do you want a conclusion, Jeff?
I think the reason we're here is because we want to talk to people within the music industry, and so come and talk to us.
All right. Thank you, gentlemen. Any questions? There's a mic up here if you want to come up. Yes, sir. Can you hear? Is this mic working? You could move closer and we could just repeat the question if it doesn't. There you go.
Sounds really cool here, gentlemen. There is some altruism that I would like to kind of tie into more here, because the idea of investing in artists is would that be in a more an LLC, kind of the artist business infrastructure? And is there also any interest in investing in copyright ownership? Because it seems to me like these revenues are directly associated with copyrights and not as much artists. And you have Royalties Exchange and some other companies that are getting involved in that. And is there any interest in that as well?
I think that's exclusive interest. We're not investing in artists, we're investing in royalty streams. Okay. So we're not investing in the LLC.
Thank you. So along that notion, I'm curious, if let's say, for example, an independent artist puts their music out through a distributor like TuneCore or CD Baby, and they already have this set up on Spotify and they're starting to get some streams in, but they want some more money to do some promotion or build a new album. How do they go and specifically, how do you take actually take the rights to the song and are able to collect them? Because if it's already set up through a distributor and it's just going straight into their bank account, that's just something I was a little curious on.
Sure. Good question.
So we like to think of this as it's sort of a question that PROs and distributors are used to dealing with. It's like another song split, as if we are a member of the band, because we're just providing that upfront capital. So we're really just leveraging the existing tools that are out there for splitting the revenue streams.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
We're joining the band.
Yeah.
Got it. And does that become more complicated when more players are involved, labels and various things?
Yeah, I mean, again, that is part of the mess, part of the tangled mess I was talking about. But I think that is actually, fortunately, one bit that is solved. I think there's already a whole load of people taking portions of royalty streams as the writer and the backing singers, and that's already solved. And PROs have kind of solved that problem.
Got it. Okay, that makes sense.
Hi, my name's Rio, and one of my questions, I see that there's kind of like two parts to your business in some senses. You say that you are investing in royalty streams, not necessarily artists, but at the same time, you are providing some very important data for artists to be able to continue to motivate their career in some senses. So in terms of trying to vet some of these artists who are possibly going to be signed to you? Are you looking into artists that are already established who are signed to a label, or are you looking for independent artists?
I think we're probably looking more for independent artists because they're the guys who actually own the royalty stream to be able to sell it.
Right.
And I think the only barrier to entry is there's got to be some data. So I think the only people right now that we wouldn't be able to talk to is somebody who has got no music at all, but
Right.
is hoping to launch a career. But as soon as there's data, that's the kind of people we're very happy to talk to.
Okay, thank you.
Hey guys, thanks for the talk. I was wondering, so you have like all of this data you're pulling from thousands of tracks, thousands of releases, et cetera, and I know that you can't possibly be sampling from every single release in the world ever. So I was wondering, on like the statistical front, how are you constructing your sample, and in order to get like a representative sample of the market?
Well, these days it's actually with big data tools, you can actually use all the data available. So there are some cases where, for whatever reason, a malfunctioning API, some data might be missing, and you can also use the machine learning techniques to impute those missing values. But we really do strive to cover the entire music universe.
Okay, one other very quick question. The graph you had up before with digital growing, can you define what digital is? Like, that sounds really broad.
Oh yeah, it is broad, but I think the main thing that's driving that is it's used to be downloads, and then it was downloads and streaming, and now it's kind of just streaming. But basically, any of these apps or sites or services that get you music from the cloud to your headphones.
Sir, 1 second. Just before you ask the question, I want to clarify one quick thing. We already established this, but I want to make sure it's clear. Artists would come to you. You won't use the data to identify and seek out artists to make deals with.
Yeah, that's correct. I think we don't want to be choosing artists. We want to be investing in anybody who's got the data.
Good. Sir?
Aloha. My question has to do more with the nature of the contracts. And I was just wondering, I mean, it's, you guys are just developing it. It's kind of a nebulous thing right now. But one specific concern would be, is there a reversion clause with the IP?
There's some details that we need to work out on the exact nature of the contracts, but our ideal world is that it's very simple, very clear. The term of the contract is defined by the musician themselves and not by us. So that's where we get back to the slider concept. Our hope is to implement that, and that's a kind of little thing that we'd like to push into the royalties world and make it a bit simpler.
And then also, I don't see any reason why an artist couldn't buy their rights back from us if they choose. We will be updating our valuation, so hopefully between the time they sold and they want to buy it back, hopefully the valuation is increased. But if they then want to take back 100% ownership, that could be possible.
And it's the artist's choice. Again, the slider scale concept, the idea is the artist can have 1% investment or 99% if they want, which you discourage, 99%. Right, okay, sorry. I'm repeating myself. Go ahead, ma'am.
Hi. So you mentioned partnering with possibly the PROs. And as far as my understanding, the way that the PROs are calculating royalties is not exactly precise at the moment. Do you think it's a possibility that you'll be using your guys' data expertise to kind of improve the PRO system, because that would both benefit you to be gaining more royalties and the music industry as a whole?
I think we'd be very happy to help if there's something we can help with. I don't want to pretend that I understand their business better than they do.
Well, I think one benefit we're trying to assemble a portfolio of music, and as an individual artist, it is harder for you to go to the PRO and say, I think I'm not getting what I'm supposed to. If we can use data to scan across our entire portfolio, then we have a little bit more weight.
But do you get into, this may be getting far afield, and let me know if I am doing so, but do you get into sort of what AudioM does, which is sort of, hey, I'm not getting my royalty payments. There's a million different people streaming all these different songs that I wrote. There's cover versions and on and on and on. How do I sort of identify what the appropriate royalty payments are that are supposed to come with me and make sure I fill out the right forms? Do you get into that or no?
No, okay. I think that's sort of, it would be lovely to try and make that part better, but I think we've got enough, biting off enough already.
Sure. Apples and oranges. Okay.
Hi there, thanks very much. You've described that you're going to help provide capital for artists who are developing their businesses or their careers, let's say. But you're also basing it on historic revenue streams. And so how are somebody who's starting out, going to get capital? They'll have to you'll only be able to interact with them at a certain point.
Yeah, I think I think that we're probably not the right people to be funding an artist that is literally just starting out. There are other sources. I'm not saying they're great, but there are other sources.
Like
So
for example,
they'll have had to have a level of success.
It doesn't have to be success. It just has to be data. So it just has to be a track record. It could be a disaster, but it's just got to be data.
yeah, for example, an independent artist, sort of DIY musician, might go the route of crowdfunding to sort of get their first release out there. Because they have nothing, they just depend on the people who know them personally. But then that music is out there, and then for going to a professional recording studio, they might want some capital for that. And then if there's data out there about how that initial release is streaming, then we can look at that and make evaluation.
Yeah, so in fact, you may be competing with crowdfunding as a method of raising capital.
Well, I think there's sort of different flavors. Crowdfunding is really about the personal touch, as I understand it, and we're about just completely data driven.
Thanks.
Hi, thank you for a very interesting talk. Have you started testing your valuation model?
Yes.
Okay, so my question is, how accurate is it in its predictions?
Actually, that's a really good question because we kind of skipped over this, but the whole point of investing in a very large portfolio of artists is that we don't have to be very good. We have to have a 51% edge. We don't have to have a sort of 75% edge. So we're confident that we're good enough. But the point is that some of them we will get wrong. Some of them we'll lose on, and some of them will win on more than we expected. But the hope is that on average we're sort of got that 51% edge, and that's very, very similar to the types of investments that we do in the stock market, in the financial markets. Is that we never expect to win on every single bet we place.
Okay, that's very interesting. Then I guess you won't be able to answer my second question if there is time. At the level of individual songs, can you predict revenue? Like, what is the most predictable demographic for? I mean, can you bet on hits?
I'm not
Do you understand my question?
I'm not sure I entirely understand it.
Okay, so when you have a portfolio of songs or big data, you can do the calculations. But can you, at the level of individual songs, predict the revenue? And can you understand what drives revenue?
Yes and yes. We do our predictions at track level. And that's where I go back to my point about our predictions are not very good at track level. So they will be good enough, but at a single track level we can't necessarily say that we are very good, but we're 51% better than so we don't have to get a perfect prediction at the track level. And then you aggregate those over a portfolio, and then the hope is that you average out.
Yeah, the way I like to think of it is it's really pooling risk across artists, across tracks. So as an individual musician, it's a very risky career to go into, but we can help offload some of that risk because we can spread out that risk, pool it across many artists, and then that's safer. And then hopefully we can afford to fund artists to be able to take those risks and produce more great music.
So it's stocks versus mutual funds, this whole discussion, right? Isn't that kind of?
Yeah, mutual funds is an aggregation of stocks, and then that evens out your
less risk.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Right. Sir.
Hi, I'm wondering if your market is probably more the manager than the artist. I think some of the small managers need that capital, and I can't see you giving hundreds of thousands of dollars to people. I think it's more 5s and 10s and 15s. And I think managers probably are a better market target.
I think you might be right. I think we're not necessarily going to say that we're going to exclude any one person, as long as they own the royalty stream or some portion of the royalty stream, then that is part of our market. I think the market could also include independent record labels who have a back catalogue that they might want to just get rid of. So the market is kind of quite dispersed.
Thank you.
But there also could be artists who are sort of forgotten, right? Who are sitting at home and suddenly a song of theirs hits a TV show or something like that, and suddenly they're back in the game again, and they might just use you, right? I mean, they might just sort of say, this track or this series of tracks is we want to see what happens with the data, and they don't even have a manager, right? I mean, that's just off the top of my head.
I think most importantly, we're not asking why somebody wants to. We're not like the bank. We're not going to be sitting there saying, why do you want this money? Do you want to buy a new car, or do you want to finance a vacation? That's not our business.
Yeah, fair enough. Sir.
Thank you guys for the very interesting talk. Have you guys thought about using your data for something else? Because Thomas, you mentioned you have certain interests in very peculiar. I think it's eclectic is your word. Have you thought about using that to say maybe give it to potentially partner with Spotify or whoever it is to have the general public to help choose their music? And a follow-up question to that is, how would you prevent them to use your data to go after artists?
To prevent them from using the data to what? Sorry?
Go after artists like what you are trying to do.
I see. Well, as far as the first question, I think there are an endless number of interesting things we could do with the data. Right now, we just want to try to do the first thing well.
Sure.
But yeah, there's lots of great stuff to explore. And as for the second, so what's to prevent any platform from doing what we're doing?
Right.
I guess how we're differentiating ourselves is we're coming from this company, Winton, that has this long track record of using data to make forecasts about the future, particularly in the finance world, and that's sort of our edge. So we're learning more about the music world, but that's the expertise that we're bringing.
Okay, cool. My second question is actually for you, Steve. You had a graph up with all the music revenues and everything. Obviously, you can see it coming down, but then we're finally slowly seeing an uptick. Do you think it will eventually go back to, I don't know, whatever the heyday it was?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Record labels are starting to see things coming back. I'm hearing. I interviewed a prominent attorney last year for the updated chapter of my book, and he said the Grammy parties in recent years got really sad. And he said, but just last year, 2017 Grammy party, it was really good again.
Well, that's when the uptick started.
Right, exactly. And so I and then Spotify's about to do this IPO, which is supposedly valued at $23 billion. And record labels all have a total of, I think, 20% equity. And so there's going to be a windfall of some kind. We don't know what kind it is. So I do think there's a little bit of sort of very cautious Happy Days Are Here Again being sung a little bit at labels, not to the extent of the CD era, because the CD era was just crazy. Everybody got crazy, crazy rich. Right. And it was the hookers and blow period yet again. I'm not sure that's coming back completely. But one question, one important question implied in your question is sort of, does all this benefit artists in addition to labels? Because labels have all this equity. Are they going to share it with the artists? Are artists getting good royalty deals? Are artists getting treated fairly with the publishing and so forth? That's still a very much open question. It's, as I'm sure a lot of you know, it's very, very complicated. So, just as the CD boom took off and benefited the labels first, and eventually kind of trickled down to the artists, it may happen this way, or there may be some new technology that comes along. Who knows? So I do think there is a lot of cautious optimism. That's a good question.
Cool.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Sorry, do you have any variable to think about the team behind the band? Because, I lost some money because I don't have this variable in my mind, and I invest in one band, and they have an amazing landscape, but they don't have a good manager, so I lose my money there. So how can I measure the team, or how can you measure the team in these variables of data?
I think, so we see the effect and not the cause. So if we're seeing that the music stream counts are going down, that could be because that genre of music is becoming less popular, or it could be because the team is fighting and people don't want to listen to their music. So we see the effect and not the cause. In answer to, I think, what your first part of your question, how do we cope with that, or how do we cope with sort of some massive fallout and the band breaking up and disappearing? There's kind of two bits. One is, we're investing in back catalogue, so we're not investing in their future. And then the second part is we spread our bets across hundreds, thousands of tracks, and so hopefully they're not all going to break up.
And also to the more speculative data side of your question, as far as the team, producers working on particular records, that sort of thing, that is also public data that we can scrape in and try to put together. So maybe if you're a new artist and we see that you're teamed up with a producer we know has been involved with these other successful groups, we can certainly take that data point into account.
Thomas was talking earlier, he made a really interesting point about sort of, can you hook up a producer and an artist or two different artists who might collaborate using data alone, like not making a creative decision and saying, can we add 1 + 1 and create, a bigger hit? And that's something that you guys are at least thinking about, right?
Yeah, we like to think all sorts of crazy things.
Yeah. Sir.
Sorry, just to ask again, or it's a different question, but on the performances, is that performance royalties or like ticket sales? And do y'all plan on collecting revenue from ticket sales or just from the live performance royalty streams, or not streams, but from the PROs?
Right. Well, I think the plan is just we'll invest in whatever royalties the artist wants to put on the table. So if you're getting paid for ticket sales, then we're happy to include that in our evaluation and add that also to our portfolio.
But the artist gets to choose.
Right.
Yeah.
I was just wondering, because that's not like something that comes in through the distributors. That's like a separate process. So I was just wondering how y'all planned on sort of counting that and collecting it before the artist can take it and spend it.
I think there's definitely some operational challenges, and I think that's where we will partner with some people in the industry who have already solved those problems.
Okay.
Good. Well, one more.
Sorry, quick question. I don't want to change the topic, but I want to know your thoughts on blockchain for music royalties. I know it's a very big thing, but it's more automated that way, or kind of what do you see? What does the industry really think about that, or is that just kind of?
My view, we haven't really talked about blockchain because we didn't want to sort of. It's a tool. It's not a reason to exist. And I think this is actually this would be a very, very good use for blockchain. I think royalties. I think it would work very well. It would be a nice use. It would be kind of a sensible use for it, and it would be quite interesting if that happens.
I just got word we are over time, so that was the last question. Gentlemen, thank you very much for the panel. Thanks everybody for the great questions, great audience.